They did not give humanity a colony. They gave humanity a landfill with an atmosphere. The Threndal Compact called it a goodwill land grant, delivered with the kind of smile a landlord gives a tenant he's about to evict. The planet was named Kesh 9 in their registry, and its file, translated into English by a very polite machine, read, non-arable, non-strategic, radiologically saturated, recommended disposal. Transfer to non-aligned species for symbolic diplomatic gesture only, no further compact obligations attached. They were throwing it away. They just wanted witnesses. Ambassador Threlko delivered the news in the General Assembly with his hands folded and his translated English flawless. Because the Compact had been listening to Earth's broadcasts for 60 years and had learned every idiom worth condescending in. We offer this world as a gesture of friendship, he said, with the understanding that humanity will find it instructive. He smiled the way people smile at children who have asked for the moon and been handed a picture of it instead. The room was silent, diplomats shifted. Someone from the State Department began drafting a polite refusal. Dr. Amara Osei did not stand up to argue. She raised one hand halfway, the way a student does when they already know the answer and are mildly embarrassed for the room. "We'll take it," she said. Threlko's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. "The planet is uninhabitable, Doctor." "I didn't ask if it was habitable," Osei said. "I asked what's under the radiation." Well, that was the reframe. Nobody in the room understood it yet, but Osei had spent 14 years arguing that a planet's habitability rating had nothing to do with its value and being politely ignored by every funding committee on Earth. She was a geochemist, not a diplomat, and she had a folder of rejected grant proposals 3 centimeters thick that all said some version of the same thing. If a world burns hot enough, long enough in the right isotopic ratios, it stops being a wasteland and starts being a battery. The survey team went down 8 weeks later. 4 people, 1 shuttle, and a mandate that fit on an index card. Find out why the Compact was so eager to give this thing away for free. Dr. Osei owned the geology. Commander Iyabo Coker, no relation to the soda, a joke she made exactly once and then never again because nobody laughed, owned the survey logistics. Dr. Rajan Bilas owned the atmospheric chemistry. And Yusuf Demir, who had been laughed out of 2 conferences for a paper on recoverable actinide density in tectonically active exoplanets, owned the numbers nobody else wanted to run. The first discovery came at the crust. Osei stood at the edge of a fracture valley 2 kilometers wide and stopped talking mid-sentence. She crouched down. She did not stand back up for 11 minutes. "The radiation isn't fallout," she said finally. "It's ongoing decay. Natural, this isn't a dead world someone poisoned. This is a world where the mantle never finished forming, the heavy isotopes never settled. They're still up here, still hot, still decaying, because the planet's tectonic cycle stalled 400 million years ago." She looked up. "This is the richest actinide deposit any of us have ever stood on. It isn't ruined, it's young." The Compact hadn't dumped a corpse on humanity. They'd handed over a planet still in the middle of being born and mistaken its violence for uselessness. Bilas found the second piece 2 days later in the atmosphere itself, and he did not sit down so much as go quiet in a way that made Coker check his vitals. "The atmosphere's cycling something," he said. "There's a photochemical loop here I don't recognize, and it's converting free radiation into a stable isotope suite at the upper troposphere. Something is scrubbing this planet's radiation and banking it. I don't think this is a hazard. I think it's a refinery, and it's been running itself for 500 million years." Demir owned the discovery that changed the mission's classification. He ran the numbers for 6 straight hours and then walked out of the shuttle without his jacket in -11-degree wind because he needed to not be inside a metal box when he said the number out loud. "At current extraction rates using our best equipment," he said, "we could power the entire eastern seaboard for 4 centuries off 1 fracture valley. There are 11 of these valleys on the northern continent alone." Coker didn't own a discovery. She owned the silence after each one, and the radio calls back to Earth that got shorter and shorter as the implications got larger and larger. There was a 4th finding, smaller than the others, and it belonged to no one because everyone saw it at once. On the 9th day, the team crossed a ridge into a valley none of the Compact's own survey drones had ever mapped. The coordinates weren't in the file they'd been handed, because the file itself was decades old, generated by a single automated pass that had flagged the whole planet as radiologically saturated and moved on. Nobody at the Compact had ever walked this ground. They had judged the entire world from orbit in an afternoon and never come back. That was the detail that stayed with Osei longest, not the isotopes, not the atmosphere, not the numbers. The fact that an empire old enough to have turned diplomatic condescension into an art form had never once bothered to look closely at the thing it was giving away. "They didn't lie to us," she said to Coker one night, watching the 2 moons rise over the ridge. That's the part people back home are going to get wrong when this story gets told. They didn't hide anything. They just never looked. Their whole file on this planet is one drone pass and a bad assumption filed and forgotten. We beat them with paperwork they wrote and never reread. Coker didn't answer right away, then cheaper than a war. Cheaper than a war, Osei agreed, and it will still make Threlko's superiors furious in a way no war would have. A war they could frame as tragedy. This they can only frame as an oversight. Empires can survive being feared. They have a much harder time surviving being embarrassed. The Compact noticed on day 41. Their communication arrived in the same bureaucratically immaculate English as the original transfer. And it read the way a man reads a parking ticket he wrote himself and is now surprised to be enforcing. It has come to the Compact's attention that the transferred asset Kesh 9 is undergoing unauthorized industrial survey activity inconsistent with the symbolic nature of the original gesture. Humanity is reminded that all mineral and isotopic rights derived from Compact-originated worlds remain subject to retroactive claim under Compact Reclamation Statute 12. You have 72 hours to cease survey operations and submit to inspection, or the gesture will be considered rescinded. They wanted it back. Now that it was worth something, the gift had strings and the strings had teeth. Osei read the message twice, standing in the shuttle's cramped common room with Demir's coffee going cold in her hand. Then she did something none of the diplomats back on Earth expected. She smiled small and a little bit sad and entirely without fear. 72 hours, she said, is exactly enough time to finish the survey. The Compact frigate arrived 4 hours before the deadline, because condescension does not believe in patience. It hung in high orbit, a single ship, because they hadn't expected humanity to say no, and they certainly hadn't expected the answer to already be filed with 3 interstellar registries. Coker had spent the deadline differently than the scientists had. While Osei mapped fracture valleys and Demir ran extraction models, she quietly requested an emergency escort, not from Earth, whose ships were still 6 months away, but from the Vantech Cooperative, a trade bloc with old, ugly history with the Compact and absolutely no love lost. 2 Vantech cruisers dropped out of transit 90 minutes before the ultimatum expired, invoked as co-signatories on the original transfer treaty. Because Osei's paperwork, every scrap of it filed and countersigned the moment the gift was accepted, had made Kesh 9 legally, permanently, irreversibly human property the second the ambassador's smile had left the room. The frigate's captain opened a channel, polished and precise, and delivered the formal demand for inspection rights. The Vantech cruisers answered instead. 3 sentences translated flatly, the transfer was unconditional. The Compact's own registry confirms this. Reclamation Statute 12 does not apply to gifts recorded as final. There was no battle. 2 minutes of silence, the specific and total silence of an empire realizing its own paperwork has been used against it, and then the frigate reversed course and left orbit at a speed that was, by any diplomatic standard, undignified. For those 2 minutes, the shuttle crew held their breath anyway. Demir had run the frigate's weapons profile the moment it dropped out of transit, 40 particle cannons, shielding rated for a small planetary bombardment. Nothing on the survey team's little shuttle that could have answered a single shot of it. The Compact ship had every capability to make good on its ultimatum by force, and for 120 seconds it looked like it might. Coker watched the frigate's weapons signature spike once, briefly, as if a junior officer had reached for an order that never came. Then it dropped again. The captain had done the arithmetic too, and the arithmetic wasn't about firepower. It was about what happened to a Compact that opened fire on a legally finalized gift in front of 2 Vantech cruisers and their own recorded treaty language. A war they could win in an afternoon and lose in every court and market that mattered for a century. The Compact had built a legal trap for a species they assumed wouldn't read the fine print. Humanity had read every word of it before the first shuttle ever launched. Ambassador Threlko's official statement came within the hour, dense with unmoved formal language about jurisdictional review and ongoing dialogue. It changed nothing and admitted nothing. His personal message came 4 hours later, unlogged off any Compact channel, and it began with 11 full seconds of silence before he spoke. Dr. Osei, another pause. I confess I did not expect this outcome. It was, in retrospect, audacious of your species to accept a gift I had assumed you would refuse out of pride, and audacious again to read the transfer terms more carefully than my own office did. I was wrong about what your species would see when you looked at a ruined world. I saw an ending, you saw an opening chapter. A final pause quieter than the others. I do not say this to my superiors. I say it because I would like, for my own understanding, to know how you knew. Osei sent back 4 words, we didn't, we checked. She was already back in the fracture valley when the reply came, kneeling at the edge of a crater with Demir beside her. running isotope ratios on a sample that would take another 11 weeks to fully assay. Her hands ached. She had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 6 weeks, and there was a particular kind of grief in that, not for anything lost, but for every year before this one spent writing proposals nobody funded, for a planet nobody yet knew existed. 4 centuries of power for the eastern seaboard, Demir said again, like he still didn't quite believe his own number. That's the wrong way to think about it, Osei said, standing, brushing red dust from her knees. That's what we can use. It's not what it's worth. She looked out at the valley, at the heat shimmer rising off ground the compact had called worthless. We haven't even found out what the scrubbing atmosphere is worth yet. Bilas thinks it might be replicable. If it is, we're not selling a mineral, we're selling a process. Coker's voice came over the comm, flat and amused. Command wants a name for the formal development proposal, something better than Kesh 9. Osei thought about it for exactly as long as it took to look back down at the sample in her hand, still warm from the ground. Call it the Osei Demir Basin, she said, and put in the proposal that we're going to need 6 more survey teams and a permanent research station by next year. She was still dictating extraction protocol revisions into her recorder as the shuttle lifted her back toward orbit. Already 3 steps past the victory everyone else was still celebrating.